these three unicycles are all models that I would love to own. All three of them are a little bit unique, so I'm gonna kind of go over the differences between them today and talk to you about how I came to the decision as to which one I'm gonna be getting. Now, I've already made up my mind. I'm getting one of these three wheels. As you guys know, I'm currently on my V11 right now. Well, so much for going down the bike path. Oh, I wasn't sure if they plowed this or not. What's going on, guys? Did you miss me? Huh? Been a while since I made a video. Alright, well, we're gonna go with plan B today, which is just cruising around the new neighborhood. I just moved and finally got settled in. Got some free time again, so I'll be back on the video grind. But today's video, I really want to talk about the three new suspension wheels that have been announced and should be coming out this spring. And of course, those are the Begode Master, the Kingsong S20, and the Begode EX20s. Now, I've already made up my mind. I'm getting one of these three wheels. As you guys know, I'm currently on my V11 right now. I love the suspension on these wheels. I think it's just so much more comfortable, so much safer to ride when you have the suspension on your unicycle. And these three unicycles are all models that I would love to own. All three of them are a little bit unique, so I'm gonna kind of go over the differences between them today and talk to you about how I came to the decision as to which one I'm gonna be getting. So let's start off with the two that are the easiest to compare, right? The most obvious comparison, the S20 and the Begode Master. I mean, these wheels almost looked like clones of each other. They've got the same colored panels, the same shapes, very similar body patterns. I mean, these wheels are literally it's almost like Begode made a cheap knockoff of the S20. Except for that, the cheap knockoff is the faster, stronger wheel with the bigger battery. But there are some other differences between these two wheels that do make your decision a little bit tougher than just, do you prefer the quality of the Kingsong or the performance of the Gotway? You know, I think the biggest difference between the two of them is going to have to be the suspension systems themselves. So the Kingsong S20 is going to be using a coil shock spring system. Basically, it's got a big spring on the back, which isn't really going to be adjustable. That's the one thing I really don't like about the Kingsong S20 is the spring that they chose is only going to work for riders of a certain size. You know, from what I've seen in videos so far, it looks like bigger guys in the 200-pound range are going to have a lot more movement and a lot more tuned of a suspension than someone who's really light. And I don't know how it's going to work for somebody who's really big. I mean, if you're a 250-pound guy, 300-pound guy, I have no idea if it's even going to work at all. But it definitely concerns me that that spring shock isn't adjustable. I do think you're going to have a certain range of weights of people that it works really well for, and everyone else is just kind of out of luck. Whereas the Begode Master is using what I would call a traditional air shock, what we've seen in some of these other unicycles, things that can actually be adjusted to your weight by putting different air pressures inside. Now, theoretically, in the motorcycle and BMX world, the coil shocks, from what I've come to understand, are more desirable. They seem to work better, I guess. But I believe you have a range of shock weights and sizes to choose from. Whereas on the Kingsong S20, I'm not so sure that you're going to be able to interchange that shock with anything different. You might just be stuck with whatever it comes with. But we'll have to see. We'll learn more about that as these start making it into the public circulation and people are actually riding them and start making modifications to them. But we do know that the Begode Master has an adjustable air shock. So to me, I kind of think that the Begode Master's suspension system might be better. And in the videos we've seen, it looks very lively. The suspension on the Begode Master definitely has a lot of movement, and the ability to fine-tune it to your weight is definitely going to be an advantage for that machine. And our third unicycle, the EX20s, also has an adjustable air shock. So again, kind of in the same category of the Master, where it's going to be a better suspension system for more people, while the Kingsong S20 might be the better suspension system for certain people. Now let's talk batteries, right? Because all three of these wheels have a different battery system. And I think it's very interesting what we've got going on between Kingsong and Begode here. First of all, the Kingsong S20 is going to be rocking the 126 volt, 2200 watt hour battery. This is the first time we've seen this particular battery configuration in the wheel. And it's the very first time we've seen Kingsong push a higher voltage than 84 volts. So Kingsong's really going out on a limb here. They're trying something brand new that we've never seen, and it's going to be crazy powerful. You know, the Kingsong S20 will have a torque motor in it, and it's still going to be able to travel at over 40 miles an hour from what we've been told, which is just astounding. You definitely love to have the best of both worlds, right? Being able to ride it at street speeds, but with a torque motor. I think this thing is going to be a great hybrid wheel for both on the road and off. The only thing that gives me pause, however, is that this is the first time Kingsong has pushed their voltage this high. And I am afraid we are going to see some technological hiccups that come along with that higher voltage number and the components that are brand new to this company. And of course, not to be outdone, the king of the 100 volt wheels, Gotway, or Begode, have released the Master with a 134 volt system. That's right, they won up the Kingsong by just a couple volts. It's also going to have a 2400 watt hour battery, which is a little bit larger than the Kingsong. So it's going to be stronger and larger than the Kingsong S20. So of course, a 134 volt battery is going to come with the same possible issues. A brand new technological configuration, components never used in a mass-produced unicycle before. Something that hasn't been thoroughly tested and vetted by a community of riders, but only in a small sample batch. But along with that higher voltage, the 134 volt wheel here, the Begode Master, also rocking a torque wheel, is going to have a free spin of an absolutely ridiculous 70 some odd miles per hour. This is going to be the first electric unicycle I think we'll actually see someone hit 60 miles per hour on. And that's on a torque motor, guys. Imagine if they did decide to make a high-speed version of the Begode Master. You'd be talking about speeds that are just beyond dangerous. Now, both of these wheels, I'm assuming, are going to get a very similar amount of range. You're talking about 2200 watt hours versus 2400 watt hours. So it's not going to be wildly different. And because, you know, the Master is going to be a little bit torquier with that higher voltage, you're probably going to use your power a little bit harder. I would imagine both of these wheels will have no issues getting 40 miles of solid riding off their batteries. And then you have the third wheel, the Lone Ranger, once again, the EX20s, which has a very familiar battery configuration, the 100.8 volt, 3,600 watt hours. The same battery you see in the Monster Pro and in the new Begode Commanders. So that's one thing I think the EX20s really has going for it, is you're not talking about an experimental technology as far as how much stronger and more powerful the components need to be. We're talking about something that's been tested, it's been vetted. We've been riding these wheels for over a year now as a community, and we haven't really seen any issues with them. So to me, 100 volts, 3,600 watt hours, not only is it going to have tremendously more range than either of the Kingsong S20 or the Master, but it's also going to be just as peppy. I mean, really, a 100 volt wheel, do you really need it to be faster and stronger than that? So it's not like we're talking about some slouch of a wheel that's going to be creeping off the line. This thing is going to have pop, especially the high-speed version. So for me personally, I think, just for my taste, I will take the EX20 system. It's definitely going to be heavier. It's got significantly more batteries. So it's going to be the heaviest wheel of the three by far. And we'll talk about that in just a second. But it's a very familiar battery system with an insane amount of range. And for me, I think it's just the safest of the three systems that you could be purchasing. So let's talk about that though. Let's talk about the weights of these machines a little bit, because I think all three of them are aggressively heavy. You know, from what I've been told, the Kingsong S20 is going to be about 70 pounds, right around the same weight as an EXN. And the Master is going to be about the same. It's going to be somewhere in that 70, 75 pound range. These are going to be very heavy wheels. And we'll see what they actually weigh upon production. And this is the one category where the EX20S absolutely loses. It's going to be the heaviest wheel ever produced. The EX20S is already rumored to be coming in over 100 pounds. I heard 102, I think. 102 pound wheel. Absolute behemoth. If you live on a third floor, there's no way you're going to be getting one of these bad boys. Not unless you got an elevator. Now, all three wheels are going to have a 20-inch tire. I think as a community, we've really started to come to a consensus that that 20-inch tire really is the sweet spot for both mobility, you know, as far as agility, but also top speed. Having a larger tire, that larger diameter, allows you to reach higher speeds. And it also has the greatest angle of attack. You know, that's something you might hear when you're talking about tires, is the angle of attack, as far as when that wheel goes into a bump, a crack, a pothole, a rock, whatever it is. Having the larger angle, right, or I should say the lower angle. The higher your angle is, right, we're talking about like a 90-degree angle. When you hit something, you're going to bounce a lot higher than if it's flatter. And the bigger your wheel is, the shallower that angle is, the less rebound you're going to have every time you hit something. So a 20-inch tire is really, really good at being able to take on bumps and potholes. It's not going to be quite as torquey as something like a 16-inch or even a 14-inch wheel, which can just revolve a little bit harder, a little bit faster, closer to that motor. But it's going to handle bumps and imperfections a lot better, while still remaining extremely nimble and at a really good weight penalty, right? That's another thing you have to consider when talking about tire sizes. You're talking about a 16-inch versus a 20-inch versus a 22 or a 24-inch. You know, the bigger you get, the more of a weight penalty you take on your unicycle for just tire size, you know, and your agility penalty. So you really kind of want to have a good blend between the weight and agility and its angle of attack, which all three suspension wheels are going to have the same, so it's not really a big talking point here. Now, another thing that's interesting about all three of these wheels is I believe all three of them are going to have a top-mounted control board, which is great that we're seeing the industry move towards these top-mounted boards. It just makes it a lot more sense, right? It makes it a lot more streamlined. It's a lot more balanced. You know, it's harder for water to ingress into the board, although if you get caught in the rain, perhaps it's actually more exposed as it's being on top and actually pummeled by water. But I do think we've seen a lot of success with these top-mounted unicycles, and I do expect that to be the design going forward that most of these companies tend to stick to. You know, we've seen the V12 use it, the Commanders are using it, the Shermans are using it, we're seeing Kingsong using it. I really think that's going to be the design that we tend to start seeing the most. And I do believe also with this iteration of electric unicycles that we're seeing all three of these wheels using metal casing for the batteries. Now that's a huge development to me, personally, for two reasons. One, the longevity of the machine itself, right? When we're talking about a metal frame, a metal case, it's something that's going to take a little bit more abuse without causing damage to the unicycle. And of course, damage to the batteries is the number one reason why we might see something like an electric unicycle fire. So anything that's going to help prevent damage to the batteries, sign me up. You know, but I also think from a safety standpoint, if there were some form of fire, a runaway, thermal runaway of your batteries, being encased inside of a metal container can only be a positive, unless there is some form of, or I should say if there's no form of pressure release, in which case they could create some form of explosion. But assuming that there is some form of pressure release on these cases, I can only imagine that being encased in metal is going to be beneficial for when or if one of these batteries does decide to go up. You know, I do think it's a huge quality improvement to these unicycles, and I hope all the companies, I hope these unicycles are successful in that iteration, and all the companies start moving towards those metal boxes for the batteries. I think it's a weight penalty that's well worth it, especially when you're talking about a little, like, what are we talking about, a 2-pound box? I'll definitely take 2 pounds to protect my batteries much better than some plastic housing. So for me, all three of these new suspension wheels are really exciting. I think you couldn't go wrong getting any of them, really, especially in a couple months once we've seen the first iteration go out. Some of the problems have been solved, whatever little issues they may have get addressed. I think that these are going to be three of the wheels to own for everyone in the community. And it made my decision on which one I'm going to get really difficult. You'll see I'm riding the InMotion V11 today, not only because I'm talking about suspension, but because I already sold my Gotway EXN. That's right, the EXN has found a new home. As much as I loved, and I mean loved, my Gotway EXN, that wheel, absolutely phenomenal. I just couldn't get over every time I rode the want for suspension, especially out here in New England, where these roads are just miserable. Everywhere I go, it's just cracks and potholes and bumps and rocks. It's just miserable. So for me, having the suspension just makes the ride so much more enjoyable and safer. I just think it's almost a necessity for me personally in my riding decision as to which unicycle I'm going to buy. And now that we have on the market 3 unicycles that can actually ride in the road, we're talking about 40+ mile-an-hour machines, it's time to pull the trigger and get one. So now, of course, the question is, George, which unicycle did you decide to put your money down on? Well, ladies and gentlemen, you're just gonna have to wait. It'll be here in about a month. See you then.